Good afternoon, and welcome to the Carolina Codecast, the official podcast of the Carolina Code Conference. With me today is Jake Hennett. Say hello, Jake.
What's up? What's up?
Glad to have you here. So, tell us about yourself. What are you up to these days? Where are you working?
Awesome. So I'm a software engineer too at Lima One Capital. What we do is business purpose mortgages. So like not your typical I'm buying a house mortgage. This is I'm going to buy a house and flip it. I'm going to fix it up. I'm going to rent it. Whatever. I'm going to make money off of this somehow. And the way our software plays in with that, we have a quoting tool that basically if a borrower comes in, they've got a credit score, they've got a background, they have some kind of deal in mind. What we do is we give them kind of an aggregate of all those details. Hey, based on this property, we're going to give you this much money.
Nice.
We do have a very small team right now. It's 4 of us. I mostly do back end. I could be full stack. We have a really competent front end team. The front end is in a Create React app. They use a lot of front end nonsense that I'm not familiar with. Our back end right now.
Myself too.
I'm with you. Our back end is APIs, our MuleSoft right now. We're kind of switching that to Next.js, and then our database is Postgres. So I kind of wear multiple hats, sort of a DBA, sort of an API developer. We don't really have a dedicated architect. So it's with the small team comes a lot of different responsibilities, and we all kind of share that really well.
Right. And so you mentioned that your back end was using MuleSoft, and you actually submitted You were one of the more interesting submissions to the conference, and one of the reasons that I wanted to start this podcast in the first place is because we had a lot of submissions, and there was only so much time at the conference, and we weren't able to work you in as a speaker. But I mean, after seeing your submission, after hearing more about what you were doing, I really wanted to know more, and so I hope you'll definitely apply in future years as well, because
Absolutely.
We managed to cram in 16 talks, but we had 83 submissions, and it was really difficult to whittle these things down.
That's a lot.
But you went above and beyond, because some of your friends told you about the conference on LinkedIn, and then you started discussing it. I went ahead and gave you some feedback on what you thought you might do, and you recorded an entire demo presentation to submit. No one else did that.
Right.
And then you actually submitted, and I want to hear more. It was about low code, no code solutions with MuleSoft. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, kind of like to give the full backstory and everything, after graduated from undergrad in 2013, I very much just got a job, worked, didn't really pay attention to the industry much. I was just I'm doing my job, doing my thing. Right. So meetups and stuff, I just wasn't really familiar with. And in 2021, I suppose it was, maybe early 22, started working with Kate Frank. She got hired on with Lima. And Kate's really plugged into the upstate, to the Greenville, programming scene, women who code, those sort of movements. Yeah. And Kate's just familiar with everything. And so there were several things. There's a tech slam and eggs that she was like, hey, this is a cool conference downtown. We should go do that. It's I don't know how you found it, but yeah, no, that sounds awesome. And then she introduced me to the code conference, and I was like, you know what? Nobody knows about no code, low code solutions. I didn't even know those really existed until I started working on one. So we'll submit a talk idea. Worst thing, it gets shot down. I think it's kind of cool. There is very much a niche for it, but we'll give it a shot. And it's I didn't really, again, because I've never talked at a conference, never attended many conferences. It's just super unfamiliar to me. I was I'm going to give a little, here's what my talk would look like, both for, kind of pacing myself, kind of understanding what that would look like, but also running by, you and the rest of the administration with the conference, just to be is this kind of what you guys
pretty
want?
Much just me.
Run it by you then, and kind of just gauge, is there interest in this? And so it sounds like it is. And so obviously the original presentation I did is still out there, but kind of just to give sort of a talking points that we can, flesh out more here. The general idea was that as a software engineer, I enjoy code. I am big on code. And so people, will say, hey, we got this no code, low code solution. Why? That for most developers that I know, the perspective is, why does that exist? I would rather just write code. And I will still maintain, personally, I would rather just write code. But part of the issue is that the IT industry is very, very large, complex. There are different skill levels. There are different skill concentrations. There's a ton of different ability sets, and not everyone can write code. And so kind of what I've learned with MuleSoft is that where a software engineer, someone who is very familiar with writing code, would prefer just to write the code, there are a lot of roles and a lot of niches where those types of utilities excel. And one of them kind of like really became clear to me is that like we have a BA team that they might have maybe coded long before, they've got some familiarity. They're very technical with their role, but they're not really software engineers. They're not the ones who write the code day to day, but a lot of times we depend on them for the algorithm, Genesis. We depend on them for like kind of the business knowledge of like what is this intended to do. And anytime you kind of share knowledge, there's very much a risk that you're going to lose the nuance, you're going to lose some of the original meaning. And so, if one of the business, like say a sales guy explains it to the BA explains it to me, one of those steps, we've probably lost something in
Oh yeah.
translation. And so it's very difficult to preserve sort of that original intent without like really, really verbose contracts and, tech specs and like all this stuff that it's like there's a lot to that, man. And a lot of times with, a very fast-paced industry like the financial industry, we don't have time for that. That's going to take weeks. And by the time that gets to the developer, like, hey, here's what you're building, it's no longer it maybe isn't as valid, or it could be not valid at all. It's like, no, we need something to like get this on it now. And I think really one of the benefits of a low code solution like MuleSoft is, say you get the BA set up with like, hey, here you can drop this connector in, transform message just makes it whatever the payload was look like something else. And you kind of train your BA team how to use that. They could either one, build it themselves because they have the tools, or two, they can build, hey, here's what I want it to do. And they could build a flow that really much does what they want it to do without having to explain, in this condition do that. They don't have to learn the jargon we use, but then they can give us something that's like, this actually already functions the way the algorithm needs to.
Yeah.
We can do the heavy lifting of like, let me build out an endpoint, let me set up some query parameters, let me set up some stuff to actually do it, especially in a code solution. And so it's like there is very much a niche for where those excel. I will say, since that submission, I've gotten a little bitter with MuleSoft just because we actually met with some of their administration down in because it's a Salesforce affiliated
Okay.
company. We met with some of their administration with our Salesforce team down in their Atlanta office. And one of the things I brought up, I was like, yeah, it'd be really cool if like, can we get where I could just view the code? Like, yeah, you can look at the XML, once you've generated these flows, but like, could I just like make this where I could write code more? And they're like, oh, that's kind of weird. Most of our customers would write less code. Well, okay, that's not the utility for me, but sure, I'm glad we had that conversation. So it's very much MuleSoft, I think in a long-term situation is probably not for me.
Okay.
When I took the job, it was, hey, you willing to learn MuleSoft? Like, yeah, I'll learn anything. Sure, let's go for it. And another kind of benefit of specifically MuleSoft as being a Salesforce product, it ties into Salesforce really
Oh,
well.
that
So
makes
like for
sense.
companies that use Salesforce as their CRM, if you want to, like, one of our things is pulling down Salesforce records into cache tables so that like our other utilities can call, just like with a Postgres call, with a Postgres
Right.
query, hit those instead of like, because the Salesforce language for it is called SOQL, and it's like nobody wants to learn SOQL. If I'm not a Salesforce admin, I don't want to learn SOQL. It's easier for me to just write like a SQL query. And so that's one of the benefits of specifically MuleSoft is if your company uses Salesforce, it ties in super well. And that's probably one of the biggest highlights is that if you want to codify some of your Salesforce stuff and pull it out of Salesforce proper to do more things with it, data manipulation or whatever
Yeah.
you might need, that's probably one of the most straightforward ways to do it. And you could share that responsibility with your BA team rather than hiring. I mean, software engineers are expensive to hire, they're expensive to onboard. It's very expensive to like staff out if truly you don't need it. And that's, I
Yeah.
think, one way that a lot of businesses could better leverage is the resources they have or minimize the resources they have to
That
hire.
makes sense. I mean, also, don't underestimate the value of learning some obscure thing that no one else wants to learn, because half the
Convenient
time
to know.
when you find something that exists in a lot of places but no one wants to learn it, that tends to be an indicator of an opportunity.
COBOL developers are really expensive nowadays
Exactly.
if you know COBOL.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's one of those things, like I accidentally got deeply into email authentication. Never would have expected that in my life. And I've spent a huge portion of the last 10 years of my career in that direction because there's just not a lot of people that do it. But I remember whenever you first told me about MuleSoft, my first thought was that it sounded a lot like there is an actual standard called BPM, or Business Process Management,
Yes.
And so is MuleSoft like that? Does it, I mean, does it import or convert from BPM files?
So I don't think it exclusively has any tie-in with BPM. I think it follows a lot of the same
Okay.
protocols. One thing is that MuleSoft is a little proprietary, I suppose I'll call
Right.
it. So there's not really a lot of ways to import things into it, and there's not really good ways to export things
That's good
out.
to be aware of.
But I think from looking through, because I remember you referencing that, from looking through, I think it follows a lot of the same protocols. But it unfortunately is not one of those that can just port it straight in. It's like
Okay.
you would very much be like one to one, like, hey, what is it doing here? All right, let me do the same thing in MuleSoft. But a lot of times that's easier than just like having to come up with like very different architectures, like figuring out how that's supposed to do it. If it's close to one, just matching those is going to be faster than figuring out how it should look in the new architecture.
Yeah, and BPM is an interesting approach in general because it's made to be incremental. It's made to be an incremental solution, so that just for example, to kind of map this out. Say you're at a company that has simple example, a need for um, employees to apply for time off and for it to be reviewed and approved by their manager. So you would typically start out just writing up a document that says this is the process. You have to fill out this form and submit it to HR, and then HR will contact your manager and verify that they approve the time given other constraints of the team or whatever else, and then they'll notify HR, and then you'll get their approval, and it'll be put on your time off calendar, and it'll be taken out of your PTO. And it would be kind of a manual process like that to start with. Well, then you might get into the BPM setup, and the very first thing you do is you just flow chart out that process. And there's nothing automated about it, but it's just basically a diagram that says this is the process. Here's how we're communicating about this. We're sending this information, these details over to HR. Employee submits over here, and then we get it back over here.
You're answering all the questions before someone has to ask, hey, what happens here? We've already illustrated that.
Exactly. And then what you end up doing from the BPM, that's the interesting piece of it, is you say, okay, well, now I have this diagram. I want this diagram to run. And so then you begin actually converting pieces of this diagram into parts that work. You don't have to finish the entire process out. Maybe you just start with, okay, well, now we're going to convert this form that they have to submit into something that the BPM can say, okay, you can visit this URL to click this form, and this form knows that whenever you submit it, it's going to look up this person on in the system, verify the identity of the employee, and it's going to attach this request for time off, and it's going to send it over to HR, and then HR gets it, and they still contact the manager and do all that. Well, then next up, you decide, well, now we're going to automate that HR process. There's no reason that somebody from HR needs to really look at this before the manager does. So when it goes in, we say, okay, we've got a valid timesheet over here. Now we're going to send it over to the manager and say this person's requested this much time off in an email within the system, and here's the possible answers they can give, like approve, disapprove, or disapprove with reason or something along those lines. Um, and then they get that email, and then they click on the email, and the system takes it back, and it says, okay, this is approved. And then you eventually tie it into the actual payroll system so that it automatically takes the PTO out. Then it sends a note back, and then over time, you've taken a diagram of what the process looks like, and then you've slowly changed it from having some manual steps to fully automated, but none of it had to happen overnight. And so you get to start out by just diagramming out all of your business processes. And what's always been interesting to me is the use case for that sounds very obvious to me. And in practice, it's not. Because in practice, if
Really?
you show that to a programmer, they go, I'm just going to code this.
Right. It is habit,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But it's
And I
interesting how
think
it goes.
I was gonna say, yeah, I think you really highlight a very critical and understated part of kind of just like IT and computer science with that of if you have, say, at the end of like this project, a year down the road, you're gonna have this really, really cool, like robust project, and it's gonna have like error handling, it's gonna do all these fancy things. And it's like if you were to roll the clock back a year and show the developers like, hey, we're building this, like, man, that's a lot, dude. Like, can we really do that? Like that, there's just so much to that, and we're gonna miss stuff. And it's like, the old adage, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? It's like if you can really parse that down to, there is this one super simple, like small component. And we're not worrying about like how this gets to HR or how HR knows who to send the results to. We're not worried about any of
Yeah.
that. We're going to take this one part that is like, these are data points that we need input. So we're going to build out the form for it and we're going to give somebody a link to it. And that's all you need. And it's like, if you break it down small enough, usually any one of those pieces is, I won't call it trivial, but it's pretty easy. Like, I mean, you've got some things like authentication. Authentication is the bane of my existence. I hate when we have to like worry about, man, Okta's down. Like, oh, crap. Okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but we'll figure it out. But it, beyond like these very like niche specific pieces like
Yeah.
that, most of those components, when you break it down small enough, isn't terrible. And I think that people underestimate the value of spending kind of, you mentioned the diagramming phase at the
Hmm.
beginning. Like, people downplay how important that is. They're like, just get in the developer's hands, they can build it. It's like, yes, we could, but given the same amount of time without that diagram, there's going to be a lot of frustration.
Yeah.
There's going to be, I build you out a prototype and you're like, no, this isn't actually what I wanted. It's like, if we had just spent that time at the beginning, call it days to maybe a week, to really iron out these are the details, the whole process is smoother. You can distribute work better, especially if you have a larger team. Especially, it's like, you really need to be able to break that up so that I'm not stepping on your toes. We're not working in the same file. Merge conflicts are awful, and so we're trying to avoid
Yep.
that. You really, the amount of benefit you gain from just that small amount of diagramming time is like, it's really understated. And I wish that more businesses would appreciate, like, don't just throw it at developers. Yeah, a good enough team of developers can build it no matter
Hmm.
what. I get that, but it's like, it's happier for everybody if we really, if I don't know what I'm building toward, it's kind of frustrating. I have to pull questions out of the business, like, what do you want to do here? What do you want to do here? Well, what about here? Well, I come up with an edge case later. It's like, the back and forth, I've wasted more time already than what you would have spent
Yeah.
diagramming. How about, let's just, give me that on the front end. We'll make it easier for
Yeah.
everybody.
What was the I forget what the quote is, but there's some great quote about that. Like, yeah,
Ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure.
yeah, I think it was you know, 100 hours of development can save you an hour of planning, or something like that.
Honestly, had not heard that. Very accurate. We want to say the planning's useless, but like, no, that's actually really,
Oh
really
yeah,
valuable.
planning's definitely not.
And I mentioned, when I mentioned with like financial industry just being like, it's really, really fast paced. Like,
That
we will have
surprises
rate
me when you said
changes,
that earlier.
once
I
a
was
week.
I was a little bit surprised
Really.
because I would never think the financial industry of being fast paced. I would think of being
I
heavily regulated and therefore slow.
Right. And I think a lot of people, like, when that comes to mind, you're thinking like banks, like traditional, like, I'm a lender, I have to protect interest rates. You think like the stiff that's like, well, interest rates are going to go up, so we got to plan for that and we
Right.
got to be really meticulous. And I think for a lot of the financial sector that is, I forget the term, but like, you're kind of slower paced, bigger players, it is very slow, very regulated. The problem with, and I don't know if it's just business purpose mortgage or if it's like stocks as well. But I know there is certainly a small subset that's just like, it's very urgent. And the problem, because
I
we
can see
exist
that.
in this weird space, to wax poetic about Lima, is kind of, exist in this space where our borrowers are requesting money from us, and then we request money from like our funding securitizations, whatever they're
Right.
called. And so, like, we take the haircut off the middle. And so, if we give two good rates to our customers, we're not making a profit because we have to borrow the money that we gave them. And so, we exist in this very, very fine margin where, if we don't lend at attractive enough rates, our competitors take those customers. If we lend at too attractive rates and rates then go up, we lose
Right.
money. And so, it is all about keeping, as close to that perfect balance as we can. And I think a lot of it is of like federal regulations, because definitely when COVID hit and there was like the eviction memorandum and all that
Oh
stuff,
yeah.
it's like that affected us, and it was really, really fragile and kind of iffy of making sure that we don't have all our eggs in one basket. Because another thing we have, like I mentioned, that you got your fix and flip, which is your short-term
Hmm.
rentals, or your short-term deals, and then you have rentals, which are like, I'm going to buy a property and hang on to it to keep that income. And it's like, it has really benefited us having kind of both sides of that dichotomy, because there are times when short-term deals are just like dead because nobody's trying to flip houses, and then there's
Makes
times when
sense.
rental is bad because it's like, the eviction memorandums, like, nobody really wants to buy a rental property if I'm not actually making money on
Yeah,
it. So it's like, having both
that makes
sides of
sense.
that has really, really helped the business, and I do like being gainfully employed, so it's helped me as well.
That makes very good sense. I don't know a lot about the financial industry other than the loans that I've gotten in my own time. Um,
Right,
but yeah, that is kind of surprising. I can definitely see the urgency aspect of it too. I
right,
mean, because my wife owns a business, and then it's we always like to joke because early on in her business, for example, we had some more urgent financial issues where we were
right,
going to banks and like, hey, we're getting repaid by Medicaid a little bit slow. We need to get a loan, but the money's definitely coming in. And they're like, you don't make enough money for us to give you that loan. I'm like, what is the point of this? Like, well, if you're in a better financial situation, we could loan you the money. I'm coming to you for the loan because we're not in a good financial situation right now. And
right,
we got through it and everything's fine now. But we tell everybody, like, if you think you might be willing to borrow money at some point in the future, go ahead and secure it while things are good.
right now,
Because the
right.
moment that they're not, no one will give you the money.
It's harder, right? You have to have credit to build credit, and it's just this weird like I do not even try to pretend to understand all the intricacies. We have an underwriter team that like that's all they do, and like you guys are great at your job. You tell me what you need, and I'll build it. But like I'm not. I have my own mortgage. I have, like you said, I have my own stuff that if I've borrowed money here or there, but it's just like I don't want to know the intricacies. I do not plan on getting into real estate as a means of making money. I'll leave that to you guys. You guys do it better anyway.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, so what else is going on with you these days besides just from
Yeah,
programming? I saw your
so
cat walking around behind you.
oh yeah, was she over here? Yeah, she's great. She got dropped off on our porch early summer, and we're like, well, if nobody's feeding you, I guess we're gonna feed you. And then we got a cat. Who knew? That's how you get cats. I didn't know
Yep.
this. Um, Biggest thing right now is I'm finishing a master's in 3 weeks,
Yeah.
and I will be really glad to be done with it. So I'm going to Southern New Hampshire right
Okay.
now. Kind of a long, circuitous journey with that. I worked at an employer a while back. They had tuition reimbursement. I was like, you know what? I want a degree. Like I finished my undergrad. I was like, I want to get like a master's.
Nice.
So I was looking around. I was making sure that I wasn't going to spend like a ton of money because like at the time, like, my wife didn't work because she was still going to school. So I was like, I'm going to get something that's like not super expensive. Southern New Hampshire is like, I want to say it's like the U.S. military's biggest provider of degrees, just
Really?
because like they have a really online friendly. Like I think all of their programs are available
I mean, I've
online.
heard of them because of that.
Um, Right. No, they're super chill about like they do have an on-campus like stuff, but nearly I think it's like 90% of their stuff is online. So that's awesome. And I was like, you know what? Cool, let's start. And part of it was my undergrad was in computer science, and I was like, well, what if I want to do like management, or what if I want to do, architecting or whatever? I was like, I don't know if I want to get computer science. I'm going to go with IT with a focus in software application development because like that's what I do. But then like I kind of have the opportunity to step back a little bit. So I started there. Things got rocky when that company got bought by a venture capitalist firm. So I'm like, we're going to put this on hold for a little while. Um, Eventually, they did have to cut a ton of people. I was one of those. So I'm like, glad I stopped when I did. Worked on it, moved around a couple jobs. Finally got stable at Lima. And I was like, if I don't finish those classes, they're going to roll off and expire. And I'm going to have wasted a ton of money for a degree I didn't get. So, you know what? Let's go back. So I started back. It's been roughly a year ago now because I'd finished right at or stopped right at the halfway mark. So it's like I had a year plus one more class to go. And it's good that I started when I did because then my wife, a month or so ago, started her master's. So it's like I'm going to school, she's going to school. I've got a job, she's got a job. We got two kids, we got soccer practice, we got all this stuff, and I'm like, oh my goodness, if life does not slow down, I'm going to just like explode. So it's very comforting that I'm like 3 weeks away. I got my capstone that I'm working on right now, and so as soon as we finish that, we're good.
That's
And the
awesome.
fun thing about the capstone was like part of it is you have to kind of have this theory of like there's a business need for this. I'm going to build toward this. It's a big
Yeah.
thing. And so I've got a cousin who works as a lab technician for the blood connection.
Hmm.
And I was like, hey man, so we've had these conversations about like how to ease lab tech work, and like if you guys had utilities that would help you kind of like cross match some of these issues, that'd make your job easier. And I have to build something for school anyway, so I'm going to build this thing. It's going to be great. And so he and I like had interviews and stuff, and I was kind of taking notes,
That's a
and I
cool
started to
program.
build a create it was it's a the idea was great. But I started to build it, and I was like, well, I'm not really a front end guy, but like my front end cohorts at work use Create React app, and I was like, I'm gonna do that because like they know how to do it, so it shouldn't be that hard, for me to pick that up. And it turns out I did not know how to build a Create React app at all. Like React is not my thing. I'm just writing raw HTML because I'm like, how do I do React? Like I can't make React do what React is supposed to excel at. So finally, like a week ago, I was like, you know what? I'm so far behind. And one of the classes that I worked on previously did Java Spring Boot. I was like, I made a lot better progress with that than I am with this. So I just scrapped the whole thing, started over with Spring Boot, and got it. It is functional now. It's definitely not complete, but it's
Yeah.
functional. And the class is much more focused on like your theory, your process, how do you get. It doesn't really matter if you actually build like a really robust app. It's like, what was your idea? How did you get there? What's your plan moving forward?
Yeah.
So it's like that should be, adequate for the degree, but it's just like, man, I overestimated how confident I was with like build and create React
Oh
app,
yeah.
and I am paying the price for that now. So
I
here we are.
believe me, I get that 100%. That's one of the reasons that, you know, I joke that I'm more of a backend guy. I've done front end development. I've done like even
Right,
before all these frameworks were out there back in like the pre jQuery days. Like I was doing
right.
Ajax based applications when you were writing native JavaScript for all these different browsers and stuff.
Yep.
Um and it's less about not being a front end guy and more about just wanting to work in an environment where I'm more in control of what's happening. I
Right.
don't like having to trust anything in the browser. Just
No.
from a security standpoint, I don't like it. I'm going to distrust it. I mean, you can put validations in the JavaScript for convenience, but you still have to put them on the back end too. And so,
Right.
and so for
Right.
me, it's just a matter of if I'm going to have to duplicate the work of anything that I do on the front end, I want to just do it in the back end. And so,
It's safer. You're more familiar with it. You may as well do it where you're more
exactly.
comfortable.
And so, solutions like the Elixir, the Phoenix Live View, or Ruby on Rails' Turbo framework that kind of lets
Right.
you drive everything from the server side and just sort of get a more interactive experience on the front end anyway. Those appeal to me, and I've never been much of a designer, but whenever Tailwind CSS came out, I decided to, I saw everybody talking about this thing, and I'd never gotten into really learning Bootstrap or the other front end frameworks that were out there. And I sat down and I went
Right.
through, I
Let's give
got
it a
their
shot.
their book on this process, and I went through and I read through their book of where they explain kind of what a design system should look like. I remember going through it. I'm like, I'm not a designer, but everything in here makes perfectly logical sense. And now that I've seen this and understand like what a design system, whether using Tailwind or not, should look like on a platform, uh, I have a hard time unseeing it. Like the moment that you see, if you were to structure your things this way, your life will be easier in general.
Right.
It's hard to unsee that. And then when you go and learn Tailwind, you're like, okay, well, this follows that exact idea of having a design system in place. And then you jump through some of the logical holes where you're like, okay, well, yes, this is going to be a messy, compilation of a bunch of different class names to get what you want, but you're just writing it in the one place because it's going to be looped in the template anyway. So
Right.
what's the difference? You were going to write all this stuff in a CSS class by itself anyway. Is it
Yep.
that much better to say my class that does this very specific thing, and then having all of that code in the CSS, or is it better to just punch it all into
Just
a
do it there.
compilation of classes? And so yeah,
Right.
it's I don't even know where I'm going on this tangent right now, but when it comes to the front and back end, when you're talking about flipping over and just kind of throwing everything in the trash and then going back to what there's a lot
Right.
to be said for just doing with what and moving
Right.
forward. And I'm a polyglot developer. I advocate for learning a bunch of different languages and using the right thing for the job. But
Right.
I also don't advocate for stopping everything that somebody's doing and switching to a different language when you've got all of this existing
Right.
knowledge investment in another thing. Because at the end of the day, you can do almost everything with almost everything. There are trade-offs in scaling in specific use
Right.
cases, but for the most part, it doesn't matter that much. It's whatever gets you the most productive
No.
faster.
And that's honestly, that's kind of it was really cool. Like one compliment that I'll pay Lima, and it's like it's been super helpful, is like when we were looking at MuleSoft, like, look, this is not sustainable for where we want to go, what we want to do. We're just shoehorning a ton of business logic in this. The architecture is not built for it. We have to switch to something, and we had this big like we're gonna build another API package. What do we build it in? how do you make that decision? And we spent a couple days like kind of doing research, talking about it, and then finally, our senior, he was like, "Why don't we just like build one endpoint in like three different architectures and just kind of see what happens?" It was really cool. So like we did one Nest, we did one Express. There was one other I forget that we kind of just like everybody chipped in and kind of did their own like, hey, I'm going to build this one. And when we built the three, we had this little like I think the official Scrum term is a spike.
Yeah.
And we kind of just like talk through like, okay, what were the benefits here? What were the shortcomings? Where we want to go? And since our front end is in JavaScript, we would like to have kind of full stack be JavaScript. One for resource hiring because it's like if you want to hire somebody that does your front end and your back end, it's like well you got to know C# for the back end, you got to know JavaScript for the front end. The more that you add to it, the more difficult it is to hire someone who happens to know all of those technologies. If the entire stack from top to bottom is JavaScript, it's like, hey, JavaScript? Cool, you're hired. So that's, we wanted to centralize on that. And Nest kind of was just like the one that we gravitated to. It's like we ran into some issues where deployment hosting with Nest was going to be a little bit more difficult to work
Mhm.
out. And we're actually working, that's one of the things that, part of our team's working on now is trying to figure out kind of those pipelines and stuff. But it's like, you know what? Okay, having done like a physical application, having used this in practice, you get a better opinion on it.
Yeah.
And so that's the one we chose. And it's like I really appreciate that the business is not like, oh, you're wasting time, you're gonna throw away code, so don't do that, just choose one. It's like, no, you don't realize again with your, an hour of planning versus 100 hours of dev work,
Mhm.
it's like us spending like 2 days maybe really just like building a thing, trying it out, seeing it's like we are I don't know if maybe we could have gravitated to Nest anyway, but it's like we have a very good confidence now of like, nope, we tried those. This is the one we want.
Nice.
And so it's like everybody worked together to come to the decision. Nobody's mad that like, well, I wanted to do whatever, I want to do BOGO sort instead of, merge sort. It's like, no, no, no. We all collectively came to the decision. And it's like, it works better for, team integration. It
Absolutely.
works better for morale. It's like, I appreciate that for those 2 days, the whole team is more effective. We're driven. And, this has kind of been the first time we've done it, but it's like the team just works so well together. It'll happen again in the future. And I think we'll come to similar conclusions where like,
Yeah.
we tried them out. This is the way to go. And we're all better because of it.
And you actually hit on something that not a lot of people realize, but just making a decision versus having a process where everybody's involved in the decision. Even if you end up
Right.
ultimately making the same decision, the fact that you had everyone involved in the process gets everyone
Yep.
more bought into the solution. They understand why. They've talked through the options, and ultimately we've agreed on a conclusion. I coach people on this stuff, so I'm a certified SPC. I'm certified as a
Okay.
skilled agile consultant, where I can help
Right.
people implement the safe scaled agile framework stuff. And it's uh, there are ways to really strictly adhere to it in a very large company where you need certain communication processes, but ultimately it's a collection
Right.
of good business practices, and so you can kind of pull piecemeal parts where it's gonna help you here and there. And one of the
Right.
biggest things that I like to take people through is basically an exercise where you kind of use the same story point system, but for determining what your actual priorities are. Uh,
Okay.
and so it's a process where you use a formula. You can look this up. It's everywhere. It's called weighted shortest job first. Um,
Okay.
and and it's essentially a formula where you're in the financial industry. You talk about return on
Right.
investment a lot. So an
Right.
ROI formula is just value divided by cost. Simple as that. That's
Yeah.
all it is.
Easy.
And so WSJF, weighted shortest job first, is the same thing. You're basically going through and discussing the various metrics of value for the thing that you're wanting to do. And then you evaluate on the cost side, how big is the job for each of these things. And one of the things that it encourages is it really forces you to break things into smaller sizes because really large things are never going to
It's
get
hard to
done.
estimate something that big.
Exactly. But it gets people. You have to talk through the criteria on on three critical factors. The one of them is the user business value, like the general value to the user of the business, and you're using story points, or you're starting from like a relative. We all agree that this is the lowest in this category as a one, and then relative to that, what is a 2 pointer to the rest of it, and so on and so forth. And early on, you're just going off gut opinions and you're discussing and you're kind of coming to a conclusion. You're not averaging stuff out. You do it just like a story pointing exercise, where eventually you have to get to a consensus on it, where almost everybody
Right.
agrees. Like,
We're going to agree on something.
exactly. If 10 people say this is a 1 and one person says this is a 20, you're not averaging it. It's a 1.
No,
Almost
it's a one.
everybody agrees this is a 1. And then you talk about time criticality. So time criticality not being somebody said I'm giving this a deadline of this because I just arbitrarily chose it. Time criticality is, we have an event coming up on this date, and if we don't have something for this event that we can announce, then our opportunity here is completely gone. Like that's a
Right.
real hard deadline. Otherwise, you stick with targets and stuff. And so if it's time critical, if there's a level of urgency to it that goes along with something like that, the urgency itself will be captured in the value formula to start with. Time
Right.
criticality is there a hard deadline? So it's basically always a 1 unless there's a hard deadline for some reason. And
That makes
and
sense.
then the last factor you talk about is what they call opportunity enablement or risk reduction. And opportunity enablement is basically if you know there's something that you want to do in the future, but you have to lay this groundwork to get there first, it's going to enable a future opportunity. Like if we need to be on Next.js to build this next big feature that we really care about next year,
Right.
then you factor in the
How do we get to that point?
conversion to Next.js suddenly has an opportunity enablement of things that it's going to enable in the future, even if it's not really that direct
Right.
thing. And so you factor that in, you quantify the value, and then everybody's discussed why these things are what they are. That value formula at the top is called cost of delay, which I think it's a good
Okay.
way of quantifying it. And then you go through and you actually estimate what's going to be involved in doing each of these things, so that you can estimate the size or the scope of the job. And from that, you should have a formula that bubbles up to the top, whatever is going to give you the most return on your investment of time. And,
Right.
it's easy to talk through the ROI side of that and have the business people understand, well, okay, if I do this, if we prioritize things this way, then we're going to be getting more out of our investment of time. Yes. It's not just that though, because eventually you'll have people say, okay, well, we can just put these numbers on a sheet. We'll get our projections from our analysis department, from our market analysis people, or from our PMs, who will go through and say, all right, well, this is what the value formula is, and our devs have estimated as this, and so here's our numbers, and we're going to go based on these numbers. The critical thing is having that conversation where everybody discusses it. Because having that conversation where everyone discusses it is what gets everyone on the same page. It's what gets everyone bought into this is what we're doing, and we all agree and understand why. Because if you don't have that, there's always going to be that guy in the back of the room that goes, well, I told him we should have been doing this. I told him we should have been doing this. Nobody listens to me. I told you that was going to be a problem. Then when it blows up, he's gloating about it and all that.
Right.
If that guy's involved in the conversation and has the opportunity to voice all those concerns,
He's voiced
exactly,
it. Right.
it goes a long way. It's really critical to the process. But so I'm kind of segueing sideways on this thing. But so we'll bring it back a little bit. So let's see. We just had Halloween, but I told you earlier it's probably going to be after Thanksgiving by the time this actually airs.
For sure.
So since it'll be after Thanksgiving, any big plans for the holidays?
So my oldest birthday is coming up, and the kid loves Magi Quest. He loves Great Wolf Lodge. I
Oh,
was like, you know
nice.
what? We'll do a day trip up there. So that's the plan for this weekend. I guess it'll be a few weeks ago at that
Yeah.
point, but he loves it. Found a good group on for it. I was like, you know what? Let's go. Kids will have a good time. And it's one of those. It's the funniest thing for me is like the fact that most of my coworkers, they don't have kids, and so it's like it's a little bit of a jarring. It's a disconnect because like of the people on the team who do have kids, like we're vibing, we're talking, and it's like my coworkers are great, but there's times it's like they'll talk about going out with their friends, and I'm like, yeah, I haven't actually been out with friends, and it's been a couple years now.
How
So
old your oldest?
he's 10.
10. Okay.
Well, he will be 10.
Nice.
Yeah, double digits. I'm like, I'm not that old, am I? Here we are.
My
But no,
oldest is
they,
14, so I'm right there with you.
you're right there. Yeah. But no, my youngest is 8. It's like they keep us on our toes. And it's one of those just like I will not say that kids make anything easier ever, but kids often make things funner. And I'm
Oh
like,
yeah.
you know what? It's worth it to be a little harder if it's more fun. And so that's what we recently we built our house we finished it. We moved in April. We're on 11 acres, and it's like the kids have a go-kart, and I'm like, I'm gonna get the go-kart fixed up. We're gonna go have fun. While they're off for the holidays, I tend to try to take as much time as possible. Like my PTO is burned, like the Christmas break, just to like, let's go have a good time. Cause like you guys, I'm busy during the summer because, financial stuff just blows up in the summer for whatever reason. It's like, you know what? I'm gonna take my days off and we're gonna have a good time. So, no travel usually just cause like, I don't feel like dealing with airfare and stuff. And when I finish this master's, I just want to just like crash for a little
Yeah, I
while.
understand that.
But we try to make the most of the time that we got. But I definitely, my wife and I need a break for sure.
No, I absolutely get that. Raising kids is a lot of fun. It was during the 2020 COVID years where everybody was quarantined and stuck inside. It was way better having the kids at home. We spent so much more
Oh
time
yeah,
together as a family. I mean, we found family shows to watch and everything. But um, you know, if you didn't have that and you were stuck at home and couldn't go out, everybody that I've talked to that went through it that way was
it was
miserable.
miserable.
It was
Right,
absolutely miserable, and it was,
and that's
and it sucks, but um,
oh, it absolutely does. One of the funny things though is like the job that got purchased by venture capitalists. COVID was kind of like when all that broke, and so like I got laid off in April, May 2020. It was like right after COVID really hit full
right,
swing. And so like I didn't have a job and we're all stuck at home with the kids. And I'm like, I don't really know, like, what do I do? Like, what am I doing with my life? So we were just like, you know what? We don't have the money to spend because like I got laid off, but like we're gonna go hiking. So we went hiking like every weekend.
nice,
We had a bouncy house that was up more days than it wasn't because I'm like, it's free. Go have fun. And so like it was a really cool transitionary
yeah,
period because it's like I very much with that old job I stagnated. Like that was 100%. Like I got comfortable where I was. I was not really trying to improve myself, and I'm like, I'm not gonna let that happen again. And so like learning through like it's painful to get laid off. It is
oh
absolutely
yeah,
painful, but there's only so much. You can't always expect it. It's gonna happen sometimes, but it's also I'm gonna make myself as valuable as possible. And it really kind of taught me my worth with companies. And it's like this is it's hard because I don't want to. It's not that I don't appreciate, what Lima's done for me, what having a job has done for me, and I do like the company. But for me, it's like my family is my priority.
oh
My
yeah,
quality of life is my priority, and my job. At the end of the day, my job is a paycheck. You exist to pay my bills, and so there's very much a healthy like I appreciate the work environment. I enjoy the work that I do, but I'm not going to sacrifice myself and time with my kids, time with my family to bend over backwards for the company when it's like, look, you're a paycheck.
yeah,
I'm going to do my best. Literally, just this last weekend, we had a production issue that was breaking, like everything broke. And so we spent Saturday, Sunday just like, all right, figure this out, host this, try to do something to get it up and running because like it's broke right now. And so when we finally got that up, Monday we're going and we're like, okay, has the dust settled? It's like, okay, we're good. That was awful, but it's good. There's going to be instances like that, and I will absolutely come through if that's the
oh yeah. That's part of
expectation.
this job.
But
I mean, the
right,
expectation of you're senior, you know what you're doing, therefore you're on
you're
call.
on the hook,
Yeah, that
right?
happened.
Um, but it's just like there's so many people that'll like work late nights, early mornings, weekends just to try to get a deadline. I'm like, hmm, maybe you should have just like gave that more story points. That the fact that this was just like estimated wrong or that there was a deadline someone imposed arbitrarily, it's like that one's not my problem. My family comes first. Well, it'll get done when it gets done. And if it is truly, like you said, like it is a hard deadline because of like a legal requirement, it's like, okay, if extra hours have to happen, it has to happen. But it's just like, I'm
And
not,
the conversation that goes
my,
along with that is, if there's a deadline that has to happen, then the question doesn't become how much overtime is everybody working to get this done. It's what are we
right.
cutting from the requirements to make this happen?
Yep.
And it's there's very much a trade-off in there of level of expectations, and also you've got to have management that's going to advocate for uh, for the development teams where no one is expecting that. I get it
Right.
when you're young and hungry and you want to put in those extra hours. But a lot of times you're
Right.
wanting to put in those extra hours because you're wanting to gain experience and learn, which is great. I did it early on in my
Right.
career. I took a lot of pride in how many late nights I was willing to work. And gosh, when I was right out of school, I was like, they're going home at 5. What's wrong with them?
We have work to do.
Exactly. Like I'm here for the all nighter. Why aren't you?
Right.
And they're like, because I'm older and have my priorities straight. That's why.
But I gotta agree, it's like if you were really hungry to learn, which is absolutely a good
Yeah.
thing. It's like that takes
And
effort.
it will
Like
pay
there is
dividends
not,
later. I mean, it definitely
oh,
pays
absolutely.
dividends.
100%. And that's what, like, it is very much a trade-off of like if you're willing to put it in, if you, especially if you have the availability,
Oh yeah.
young, single, no kids, you tend to have more
Mhm.
availability. It's like if that's how you want to spend it, do your thing, man. And like you said, you'll learn tons of things, you'll build work ethic. It's helpful. But there comes a point where it's just like, I don't know if it's worth it anymore, you know? And that's when you start to like make the decision of like, okay, yes, prod is down, nobody's making quotes, the business is losing money, therefore we're in the hot seat. It's like, okay, yes, I will give you these hours. And it's like my manager is very, like you mentioned, he's very good about pushing back on the business. So if it is just something of like, hey, this needs to be done, well, we're not getting done something else done. You choose what.
Exactly.
He's good about that, and he's
Opportunity
very
cost.
rewarding of like,
If I'm doing this, I'm
exactly.
not doing that.
Yep.
Are you willing to
But
make
he's
that
really good
trade-off?
about, right. He's good about though if something like that does come up, he's very rewarding of like, hey, whatever the case may be, but it's like we very much feel appreciated for like I didn't put those hours in, get a pat on the back, and like, hey, good job, and that's it,
Yeah.
because that is very demeaning, and it kind of harms your ability to cash that in later, because the more often you do that, the less you can use it later,
Yeah.
the less you reward that, the less you can use it later. So there are plenty of businesses I've worked for that if it happens too often and it's not appreciated enough, you burn through developers. I mean, you're losing developers a couple of times a year,
Yeah.
and you can't even onboard somebody to keep, which is awful for the team, the company. It's awful for
Oh
everybody.
yeah.
So it's not at all the way to run a
Yeah.
business.
I'll never forget one of the better managers that I had. I was at Windstream, which was formerly Nuvox,
Yeah,
and I was working on the production support team. And this was after I had kids, and so my job was basically to at that time was basically to from all the other developers in the company to take their stuff to get the requirements for deployment, and then hang around for those on call times to do the late night deployments, make sure everything worked, roll it back if there was a problem, contact people if there was an issue with the deployment process, make sure everything was filed and documented according to the official processes that were audited and all that. And otherwise just run support on this production system. So if there was a problem, we were the ones that were investigating and looking into it. And and the odd thing about it is that it was it was like a perpetual temporary contract. So it was 3 months at a
right.
time, and they would just sort of automatically renew it every 3 months, but they wouldn't commit to actually just giving me a full time job. And what's really funny about that is that I actually really enjoyed that job and would have probably still been in it if they would have just given me a full time job. But they didn't, and I ended up going and working for a company where I ended up having to do some crazy like fraud resolution stuff for a year, and it completely changed the course of my career because I didn't get that job. It wasn't meant to be,
Right.
but it was a good experience overall. And one time when my kids were young, I got a call on Christmas morning. We're sitting there opening presents. I'm getting a call from my manager, and they're saying these systems are down right now. I'm sorry to call
Oh
you on Christmas
no.
Day. So my wife understood. I went upstairs, got on the computer for 3 hours Christmas morning. Luckily, we didn't have any plans that day. The kids were playing with their stuff, and they were
Right.
too young to really notice it. I was more irritated than anything else. We got it all resolved after about 3 hours. She ended up paying me for 3 full days as a thank you for the 3 hours of work that I had to put on
Right.
everybody, and I deeply appreciated that
Yeah.
at the time. And that's the type of trade off where somebody has to just acknowledge you put in a lot of time when you didn't have to, when you
We
should not
appreciate
have
that.
had to, and we appreciate and respect that. And just doing that goes farther than almost anything else, because I
Absolutely.
mean, people will people will work hard for you, and I always tell people whenever it comes for developers specifically, when you're thinking about a problem, the biggest thing that you need to do for developers is get them focused on one thing instead of jumping from thing to thing. Because if they're deeply focused on one thing, when they clock out at 5, their brain does not turn off. They're thinking
No,
about it 24/7. But if you have people jumping between multiple projects, they clock out at 5, they're done.
it's done.
And
A hundred percent.
you want those passive calculation hours so that they come in the next morning and go, I figured this thing out last night.
Right.
You
And
very
that's
much
what
want
I've
that.
tried. I've tried to tell my boss numerous times, and he gets it, and it's just like it's a matter of convincing the business. But it's
Hmm.
like there is there's very much a context switching cost of like it is
Absolutely.
very expensive for me to be like engrossed in this problem of like, okay, what is the problem, what is the fundamental issue here, kind of like what are our options, what's going to be the most efficient. And like you said, it's like this is kind of just processing in my head, and it's like, hey, that's not a priority anymore, this now has to go out sooner. And so it's like, okay, let me like write a Teams message to myself, kind of like walking through my thought process,
Mhm.
because I've arrived not at conclusions, but like at pretty solid thoughts. So like I don't want to lose that,
Exactly.
so I have to like document that, pack that up, so that whenever I do get back to this, I'm not starting back at ground zero. And then after that, I have to dig into this new topic, and it's like, and I've explained to the company, it's like I get it that sometimes that is necessary, especially in like a very urgent industry. But it's like there are times when just like mismanaged priorities cause that shift, and it's like that's a real. I don't know if they understand how expensive of a shift that is, and I think part of that
Yeah.
comes down to like contractor hours versus internal dev team hours. Is it's like a lot of businesses kind of just accept the cost of an internal dev team. It's just like, it's the cost of doing business. We pay however, many $100,000 a year to have this team, and what we get out of them is what we get out of them. But you mentioned opportunity cost. It's like if you would set us loose on like one topic, one focus topic, and just like this is our focus for days, weeks, however long it takes. It's like we churn out better code, faster code, more robust code. You get more features in the same amount of time and for the same amount of money. But it's
Absolutely.
just like because you're not paying like contract hours, it's hard to realize that opportunity cost. And it's just like,
Well,
I don't know, man. I could.
you can explain it too when it comes to the to there's a really good YouTube video that I think it's called like the art of motivation. It's one of those videos where the guy's going through a talk and then there's like an animation like on a whiteboard kind of going along with it, and it does a really good job in like 10 minutes of explaining motivation. And one of the critical things that it gets to is they're not talking necessarily about context switching, but they're talking about uh, financial motivation. And they said that a lot of business people like the idea of going, all right, well, if I need you to give me more ideas about stuff to do, I'm going to offer a financial reward. And because that's how in my mind it should work. I'm going to provide you an economic benefit, and you're going to in turn turn out more stuff for me. And what they found was that uh, if you offer a financial reward for a mechanical task, if you are chopping wood, for example, and you say if you
Right.
chop this many logs, or if I'll give you this much, per log, then you will significantly increase the output by giving it a relation like that. But when you do the same thing with knowledge work, performance goes down. Yes,
Really?
and it's been proved over and over and over again. It's a really fascinating video. And it was basically the bigger the reward, the worse the performance was. Because I
Wow.
don't know if
I
it's
wouldn't
because
have
of
expected that.
pressure or anything else, but they find it happens over and over and over. And when you're talking to business people in general about the difference between knowledge work versus task work, like I have to do this I have to sort these papers, or I have to file this, or I have to file this thing. Not I have to figure out the solution to this problem.
Right.
It's a very different aspect, and it's one thing if you're task switching and say, all right, I want you to chop this pile of wood instead of this pile of wood. Okay, that's not a big deal. You've decided that pile of wood is higher priority. But now you're saying, I want you to build this building. I want you to draw me plans for this building instead of for this building. And in order to do that, you've got to go through all of the papers and customer inquiries and conversations about exactly the different requirements for all these different things. And you have to sort all that out, and you have to prepare your workspace and line it all up. It's a very different problem when you say, okay, well, I know you're really deep into that, but now I want you to go with this one instead. And then I want you to come back to the other one like you never stopped.
Oh, that is the worst, dude.
Yeah.
That is the worst. And I will tell you, there have been several times it's like we've had a feature floating around that it's like, hey, start on this. And we start like, just kidding. We don't need that quite yet. And so we back off. And then 6 months later, hey, do this again. We start on it. It's like, maybe not, maybe not. And so we roll it back. And then we finally on the third time built this. And I was so mad because it's like, dude, if you had given us the firm requirements and we had worked on this to begin with, it would have just been done.
Yeah.
But it's like because there's that back and forth, we wasted tons of hours and tons of conversations because it's like the first couple times, like we thought it was dead, like just not going to happen. And so we didn't really make much effort to sort of like document the findings, document, the code that we had written. We're like, it's dead, whatever, that's a waste. And so we blew it away. And it's just like, if we'd known this was going to be valuable later, we would have made more of a concerted effort to record this for posterity so we're not wasting time with the same conversations. And so we've kind of learned it's like if the business ever says, "Hey, we don't want this anymore," it's like, they don't want this for about six
We
months
don't
to a
want this
year,
yet.
and then they're going to want it exactly. And there's very much been kind of a back and forth of learning that. And one of my biggest things that I will tell new developers, especially because we'll have like code schools come meet with our, kind of tour our place and kind of like talk with us to learn more about the industry.
Absolutely.
One thing that I'll always tell them is if you work for a company, the code that you write is not your code. That's not your code. That is the business's code.
Yeah.
And so if they paid you for your hours to write that and they say, toss it away, we don't want it, they didn't waste your time. They paid you for your time.
Yep.
Did they waste money in paying you for that? Yes. But that is not your code. That's the business's code. So it is very much do not get too attached to code that you're. I've written algorithms before that I'm like, this is the Da Vinci of algorithms. And I'm super proud of it. And it's just like, it didn't get used.
Yep.
And so it's very much, you have to accept, like, I wrote this code for the business. It is the business's code. And if they choose not to use it, that's okay.
No,
And I think that's very much a lot of developers, we can be kind of prima donnas. We can be a little, arrogant with our intellectual property. It's like, no, you got to lose that. The moment you become like a corporate coder, it's like, you're working for a business
Yep. Work
and
made for
that's the
hire.
cost of doing business. Yep, exactly.
Thank
So
you.
that is, I try to explain that every time because I'm like, I didn't know that going in.
Mhm.
And there have been plenty of times I was a little hurt with like, why did you not use this, this genius algorithm? Because it didn't work. Or it didn't do what they needed it to do.
Yep.
And that's okay. So
Yeah. There's
that's
a
fun.
golly. There was a time I worked for a company that had acquired another company out of Seattle. They'd acquired a Ruby on Rails app, and I was working with the team of the company they had acquired out of Seattle. But it was interesting. It was like a social media platform for churches, and it doesn't exist anymore. But I got to be on the team for a little while, and I saw they had PagerDuty set up, and they were getting pages like 30 times a month for something that had to be dealt with, and it was never in the feature priorities that were getting prioritized by the business on the Scrum side. And so finally, I just told my boss, like, look, we're getting way too many pages about this stuff. Can you just take me off the project for a little while and let me focus on
Let me work on
resolving
it.
all of these pages? And so he let me. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, we shifted, or actually after about a month on the project, we had shifted from having on-call deployments where everybody had to be around for every time the code was deployed to fully automated deployments. We went from 30 pages a month to less than one every 2 months. And the things that would have previously triggered a page, if we couldn't directly resolve them in the code, we had systems set up to identify what was going on and see if it could auto scale to resolve it if it was just a load issue or something along those lines, and then automatically scale back down when the time came. And I was so proud of it. I basically set the whole thing up, and I was like, okay, this entire system is virtually maintenance free and on autopilot now because of this work. You can deploy 50 times a day if you want to, and nothing's going to break. You don't have to worry about it having any problems along those lines. It automatically rolls back if there's a problem that it's detecting when it's trying to deploy it, and all this, and it self heals, self resolves. And then about 6 months after I basically perfected this platform, the company decided they were turning it down.
Oh
And I was like,
no.
golly. I had just eliminated your maintenance cost on this. If you shifted all the developers to another platform, you could still just leave this running and let it keep making money. They just went, nope,
And it would still be
we're done.
fine.
Exactly.
Oh man, that is so
Exactly.
disappointing.
And I was very emotionally invested in it. But I learned a lot of lessons through that I now take.
Right.
And I got more heavily into the DevOps world after that. And so you might not own the code, but you do own the knowledge.
Right.
And
Right.
that can never be taken away from you.
No, that's an excellent point. And that's what you mentioned doing, different different tasks that seemed off the wall or kind of invaluable or not necessarily valuable at the time. It's like the sort of amalgamation of knowledge and platforms and everything, it's like it really builds a much more competent developer. Because like
Absolutely.
I wrote Series 1 assembler code for 8 years, and it's just like, man, that's awful. Like, let me tell you, writing assembler is
Oh yeah.
terrible. But it's like when you're limited to 8 character field names, you're limited to like I can only jump 250 lines at a time, and memory we're limited to 64K per program. It's like you have to learn such efficient practices of like memory management and building more elegant algorithms and stuff. And it's just like you could be truthfully in most modern architectures you can be super sloppy. Like we have enough processing power, the languages are efficient enough. It's like you could write really bad algorithms and not even like notice
Yep.
that it's not efficient, just because you can throw so much power at it, so much RAM, so much processor. It's just like you can throw resources at problems now that are like, it's trivial.
Yep.
But it's like there are going to be times when like you're deploying like a really lean app to like, I don't know, Raspberry Pis. Like we're trying to do something like that doesn't always have those resources, or like we're trying to put 100 bajillion apps on like an Azure server, and so we only have a little bit per app. It's like there's absolutely benefit to kind of knowing those efficiencies and like
Having to work within
realizing
constraints.
how to improve it. Exactly. And it's like I feel like a lot of people, especially like more recent, because this, the older you are, I guess the more likely you are to have worked in those older
Yep.
platforms. There's a lot of people today that have gone into it and it's just like they've never worked really within those constraints. And it's like most of the time it's not an issue, but I feel like there's a time in any business's life that it's like you're going to run into an issue that you need that optimization. You have those constraints, and it's like you're going to need somebody who knows that, or anybody on your staff's like, I got nothing. I can't trim it down any more than
Absolutely.
this. And it really does help to have that
Yeah.
knowledge.
Uh, I had a very obsessive manager at my first internship, and he had no intention of ever using the code that I wrote. He just,
Right.
and it was great. I was basically writing C++ code, and he had me writing a queuing system, and he, at the time he didn't tell me he had no intention of using the code, but I know he didn't have any intention of using the code. Uh, Looking back, but I mean, he basically gave me a programming problem, and he said, we need to model out how we're going to do this specific problem. It was basically like a prioritized queue, um, and it needs to run through things as efficiently as it can. And so I worked it out, and I put something together, and he looked over at it after I kind of gave him the first demo of it, and he said, "That's interesting. All right, make it faster." I went, okay. And so I thought
Oh,
he knew something that he was trying to get me to. So I started looking into like threading and how to, do parallel processing and stuff. And this is back in the late 90s when parallel processing wasn't something that you did a
wasn't a
lot of
thing.
anyway.
Right.
Um, and, I kept going into it, going into it, going into it. And so I gave him another one, and I made it a little bit faster. And he's like, yeah, that's pretty good. Make it faster. And he basically did this over and over and over for the entire summer.
Oh
And I was
man.
just like determined. At one point, I made a significant improvement in time, and somebody accused me of taking out a sleep function or something. And as far as I know, he never used it, but the act of doing that exercise with me about making me dive in and trying to figure out how to make this thing faster and faster and faster has
Right.
gone with me from my entire career, where now I can't not think about the optimizations for anything that I'm
You're going to
doing.
make this, whatever you write, you're going to make it as efficient as it can be just by habit. Because it's like, oh, I had to do it before. We're going to make this as fast as it can go.
Well, and there's also the business trade off that's always in my head too. Of I want it to be that efficient, but I also need to deliver something in a reasonable amount of time. And so
Right.
I'll deal with the obvious things, and then make a note if I know that this could be tuned, but the value of the tuning is probably not going to be worth it just yet. And so
Right.
people always say they hate to dos in code. I love them because I'm in the
I'm guilty.
context, and I want to have a note while I'm thinking about this of like this. I know we can do this better or faster this way, but here's what the ROI is going to be on it, and so eventually this is how we're going to solve this problem one day, but it's going to take too long to implement it right now. And
Right.
when I go back and look at my own code, I want to see those notes in the code, and it drives me nuts when there are certain systems that will actually like flag to dos in code as like an error condition that you're not supposed to have in there, because as a developer, you know people hate their task management systems. you're switching from like GitHub issues to some other system, to Jira, to whatever else, and the company's making different decisions on why you're moving this stuff over. Everything's not going to go with it, but as long as the code's there, the notes about what I was thinking about at the time in this code are going to carry over to whoever's there afterwards, whatever else. And whether you want to consider it code comments or whatever else, that's fine. But I always like doing to-dos so that I can use those tools that are there to pull all the to-dos out and see what I was thinking when I made those notes. Anyway, we are a little bit over time here. So are there any final thoughts you wanna close out on?
I don't think so, other than just like, I really appreciate your time and the opportunity for
Yeah, thank
this.
you for coming on.
Definitely taking a leaf out of Kate's book to trying to get a little more plugged into like the local scene. Like I said, this is the first of any talk that I've done ever. But like I'm very passionate about coding. I'm passionate about technology, and I think it's a really cool opportunity. And appreciate your time, and definitely looking forward to the
Yeah,
conference.
and I'm looking forward to having you in the Hack Greenville Slack, to where you can be kind of a little bit more plugged into the community. Because if anybody's not on there and you're listening to this, you need to be. There's about 1,500 developers in the upstate, and of all sorts of different languages, talking about all sorts of random topics. And there's also events that are posted there constantly. It's the single easiest way to get plugged into the developer community that's up here. So thanks for coming on. I've got to give my every episode shout out to Herd Media. Thank you for thanks to Herd Media for helping me get this podcast up and running. If you're looking to do a podcast of your own, you're looking for some professional assistance, definitely give them a call. And thanks again to Herd for coaching me through all this. This has been the Carolina Codecast.